When you leave your home for 8 to 10 hours a day, you can kind of ignore the chaos. You get to leave, you get to walk away from it. When suddenly you don't, and you're here all day long, it was the first thing that I was like, this is it. This is what I'm going to go after first, because this is the thing that is currently causing me the most suffering. So if I could solve this problem, that's going to free up all the energy I have to do other things that are the life stuff that I want to be doing, that I'm being held back from doing by my messy house and my lack of organization. So it was a very easy choice to dig into that pretty much first thing.
Hey everyone, I'm Megs, and you're listening to the Mindful Megs podcast, Organizing an ADHD Brain, where you will hear stories from me and others on how we organize both our brains and our lives while living with ADHD. We talk about how ADHD can be your superpower if you know how to harness it. I found out I had ADHD 2 years ago, and it was very difficult for me to find acceptance. Now that I know so much, I want to share what I know and help others understand that this diagnosis is not your downfall. It's a eureka moment where you can now understand how your brain operates and how to figure out how to thrive. You can expect to feel inspired, like you're not alone, and learn about so many of the incredible organizational tools there are to help your head stay on straight. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our next guest today is so incredible. She is a professional organizer with ADHD and autism. And the conversation we have, we share so many different tips and tricks that we found to work for ourselves. I know I learned a lot through this conversation. I'm excited for you to be able to learn and then, of course, start to implement some of these strategies into your own day-to-day life. This is part 1 of 2. And I separated it because there was so much that we talked about. In fact, I am not even sharing all of it because the conversation lasted, I think, an hour and 20 minutes long. So today's conversation is about 40 minutes. In the show notes below, I include different time markers for some of the different conversations we have so you can easily toggle through what you're more interested in or just listen all the way through. And as always, a nice tip to help you listen to your podcast a little faster is put it on a different speed. I love listening to my podcasts on 2 times speed, but I know other people share that 1.3 or 1.5 works better for them. Let me know if you have any feedback. If you love the episode, please leave us a 5-star rating and reach out to me with any feedback that you might have. Additionally, if you want to support the podcast, I've dropped a link to HelloFresh. It's something that's really helped myself and my husband plan our weeks a little bit better, and it takes all the thought process out of trying to figure out what we're going to cook each week. So now we only have to pre-prep and pre-think through our children's meals versus us just picking out what we want to eat every single week. I also have a link to my friend's Remedy Bath skincare. She does small batch skincare, and I absolutely love her CBD bath bombs. I have a code with her. And really, if you end up buying through the link, it just helps me and support my own CBD bath bomb obsession, I would say. So without further ado, this is part 1 of 2 interview with Alyssa. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Mindful Megs podcast. I am here with Alyssa, who is a fellow professional organizer, and I'm so excited to introduce you today. Tell us a little bit about who is Alyssa?
Hi, I refer to myself as a neurospicy home organization strategist.
Ooh, love it.
Because I spent my early 20s and my mid 20s thinking that I was crazy. I thought something was terribly wrong with me. I thought I was the only person in the world who could not keep my home organized. I got married pretty young to my high school sweetheart, and we thought that like everyone else just had a magically clean, neat home that was super easy. And for some reason, and then in my late 20s, I was diagnosed as neurodivergent. And I found out that, hey, when you have autism and ADHD, you can't actually do things the way that other people do them, which made perfect sense with my background is actually in elementary education. So as soon as I found this out, I started asking myself, if I had a student who was struggling this much with something I knew they really wanted, would I talk to them like I talk to me? And the answer was, of course not. I would not tell them that they were lazy. I wouldn't tell them that if they just wanted it bad enough, then they would do it. I wouldn't tell them any of the horrible messages that I had been telling myself. I would be looking at their situation and thinking, what am I not doing to set them up for success? Or what is their environment not providing that's making it possible for them to achieve this thing that they so desperately want? And so I threw out all of the neurotypical organization advice that I had been taught because it clearly wasn't working for me. And I started making accommodations for myself. I started finding new ways to do things. And as I found those new ways to do things, I found it so much easier to keep up with. And things started falling into place. And suddenly I realized this is how other people feel when their homes are well organized. And then I had to put that message out there because I knew that it couldn't just be me and like a few little groups of my friends. It had to be more people that were having these same concerns. And once I started putting that message out there, I started finding them. And if you have been having these concerns as someone who is listening to this, you are not alone. And not only are you not alone, but there are resources. You just haven't been told about them.
I'm obsessed with everything that you just said, and I want to touch on everything. But first, I want to dive into when you found out that you are neuro, because in your bio, you talk about how you were diagnosed not only with autism, but also with ADHD. So when you found out, what was that process like?
I have to tell this story a little bit out of order. I was very entertained when I was officially diagnosed because these were the students in classrooms that I had always worked so well with, that I could work with when other teachers really struggled. And then after I found out that I myself am autistic and ADHD, I was like, oh, of course, that's because I speak their language. I was finding those common ground options with them because I understood them and I understood where they were coming from and they understood me. And so it was easy for them to work with me because I was not belittling them or shaming them or criticizing them in ways that other people were doing for things that I already knew were not their fault. Well, if you are also ADHD or autistic, you probably know that we sort of collect each other. And I had a friend who was in a similar education counseling kind of space to me who was diagnosed as an adult. And she basically called me up and said, I have to tell you about this because many of the things we have in common are symptoms. And I think that you should get evaluated for this. I think it would really open up a lot of options for you. And at the time I was like, yeah, I don't know, maybe like we'll see. But I couldn't get it out of my head. And I ended up pursuing that and was so glad that I did. I had about a 15-minute intense grief period right after diagnosis because especially with ADHD, they can give you medications, they can like there are things that you can get medically that can assist you. With autism, none of those things are really available. So I had this intense grief period of a few minutes that was like I am broken and cannot be fixed. And after about 15 minutes, I was like, hang on, you know what? I am not any different than I was 20 minutes ago before I knew about this. I just now have a name, which means I have access to all of this research and all of these other people who have already discovered and created these tools that I can be using. And you don't have to have a diagnosis for tools to help you if they're good tools that are helpful to you. But if you do, you can pinpoint your search in a more directed way to find those things that are going to be really helpful to you. So once I started looking at it from that perspective, it opened up so many more options for me in terms of learning about myself and my abilities and the things that I do really well and the things that I maybe need more support on and how I can make those things work for me.
I started tearing up when you talked about the intense grief period you had for the 15 minutes and also the way that you embraced it almost just as fast, which is so incredible because it took me a lot longer to accept. And I was diagnosed with ADHD. I don't know if I'm autistic. There's a very real chance. It was really hard for me. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to leave the corporate world and figure out what my life would be like as an organizer, because I found that it was so incredibly powerful to have so much less. When I have so much less in my home, there's less things for me to make decisions on, which means there's less for me to put away. And I can teach my girls. My husband and I are working together on that. How long was it before or after you got your diagnosis that you became a professional organizer?
Probably formally about a year to 2 years. I spent a lot of time before that. Basically, immediately, I dove into it and was like, okay, this is because it was also in the middle of pandemic time. When you leave your home, I'm sure this is something you've encountered as well with talking about being in the corporate world. When you leave your home for 8 to 10 hours a day, you can kind of ignore the chaos. You get to leave, you get to walk away from it. When suddenly you don't, and you're here all day long, it was the first thing that I was like, this is it. This is what I'm going to go after first, because this is the thing that is currently causing me the most suffering. So if I could solve this problem, that's going to free up all the energy I have to do other things that are the life stuff that I want to be doing, that I'm being held back from doing by my messy house and my lack of organization. So it was a very easy choice to dig into that pretty much first thing. And it took a year and a half to 2 years to really formalize my method. Once I decided that I wanted to share how I do this and why it's important as a neurodiverse person to realize that you have options that are not just the things you find on Pinterest or HGTV, because let's be honest, those are not built for our brains and they are leading us to endless frustration and no solutions. As soon as I decided I have to share this, I realized I don't want other people to be organizing in exactly the way that I'm doing it, because that's not really different than a Pinterest solution. Like, that's great for me if it works for me, but if it doesn't work for someone else, it's not helpful to them. So my method is less about the actual where do you put your stuff as it is about figuring out how does your brain work? How does your brain have the conversation between you and your space? And what can you do to make that conversation healthier and more productive for you and your brain? And that took a little bit longer to really flesh out and formalize in ways that could be communicated to someone else.
That's brilliant. When I first became a professional organizer, I wanted so much to do the Pinterest pantries and the Pinterest spaces. I wanted it so much because there is that dopamine release when you look at these spaces that you're like, wow, everything looks so beautiful. I also quickly realized that that is not reality until it could be, but it takes a really long time to get to that place. And also trying to figure out, who is my ideal client. And originally, I just wanted to work with anyone who wanted to be organized. And now that I'm working with more people who have ADHD, oh my gosh, I love it. And you're right. When you find someone who has ADHD or autism, you do become best friends immediately. In fact, I was so excited to meet you today because like, oh my God, we're going to be best friends. We're going to share so much and we're going to have so much to talk about. And I can't wait. And that's what's so cool about this, because I was really nervous getting into this space because when it comes to organization and any sort of neurodivergent brain, people immediately say, well, organization and ADHD or autism, they just don't go together. But the fact of the matter is that we thrive when we're more organized. And so tell me how you beat that stigma, because when you have less stuff and when you are more organized, your life is going to be elevated to the point where your brain is working for you and not against you anymore.
I agree with every single thing you just said. And the way that I have really sort of figured out to communicate that best, to get it from my brain into someone else's brain, which is always the hardest part, is trying to say, like, you are correct in that your brain and the organizational methods that you have been taught don't go together. Those are not going to work together. Any organizational system, as most of the traditional ones are, that is based on just make it a habit. Like that would be great if your brain did that. If your brain doesn't do that, those systems will never work for you. And it is okay to acknowledge that those systems will never work for you. We do so much better with systems that are based around routine. So it's not that you can't be organized, it's just that you can't be organized like that, which makes perfect sense because we also don't learn like them. We don't work like them. We don't organize our business operations the way that we put our jobs together, our schedules. We don't organize any of those things like neurotypical people do. Why on earth would we think we would be able to organize our homes like they do? So it's not that we can't be organized. We just have to organize like us.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So tell me, how do you keep your life organized, both digitally, physically? What does that look like for you?
Partially, it looks like radical honesty. And I loved what you were saying about the Pinterest pantries. We talk about autistic people, and a lot of people will say, like, oh, they're very literal. And they think that that means we don't understand sarcasm. That's not what it means. What it means is that I was shocked when I found out that those fridge restock videos are fake because nobody miraculously runs out of everything all at the same time. Nobody's fridge can maintain that level of perfection. As soon as your kid goes to get a juice box, it's over. Even more than that, like I need the package because I need the expiration date on the package. I will not remember how long I've had that bag of cheese in my fridge. I will not remember how old those eggs are. And like, yeah, I can test them, but also it's so much easier to just have the carton that says best by date. It makes no sense for me and my life to take the eggs out of the carton and put them in the decorative little plastic thing because that does not enrich my life at all. That would be a meaningless task that I could spend time on, but I would rather spend my time somewhere else. So for me, getting really honest about what is the thing that actually bothers me, and is it the thing that I've been told should bother me? Do I need my fridge to be aesthetic or do I need it to be functional? When I open the door of my fridge, am I thinking, oh, how nice that looks? Or am I thinking, darn it, where did I put? I know I bought that. And that's what's more important to me is that I'm using my things. I'm doing things in my home. I'm living my life. The other people in my family, we're living our life in our home. We're not trying to live in an art museum, and trying to maintain some kind of organizational system that is pretty rather than functional doesn't work for me, will not work for me, will not work for my family. A good organization system does generally look nice, but that's secondary. That's like a symptom of good organization. If your organization is intended to look nice rather than to be functional, it almost never turns out to be functional. But if it's intended to be functional, it usually turns out to look nice. So being really honest with myself that if it doesn't function well, I will struggle to maintain it, keeps me able to have those conversations with myself where I can say, is this working? Am I happy with the way that this functions? Am I finding myself leaving things sitting in piles because the places where they're supposed to go feel weird or illogical or don't make sense or are too far away? What is it that I'm struggling with? What is it that I don't like? And how can I make those things better regardless of what Pinterest or HGTV is telling me that I should be doing?
I find everything that you said very brilliant and everything that I did wrong in the beginning because all I wanted was the pretty things, right? And before I even started doing it professionally, I had gotten rid of so many things. There were so many things that I had organized that I thought I had organized. And then very, very quickly realized that I just put things in a place because I thought it might look nice before I actually figured out the function of it. And so I'll use my craft closet as an example. It's for my girls. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old. And initially I took everything out of it. I color coordinated things. I donated a bunch. I got rid of so much stuff. And when I put it back, I had all these containers already, so I didn't buy anything. It didn't look great, but everything had a space, but it did not function. I mean, the girls didn't know where things were. They didn't know where to put things back to. Plus, we still had so much of the crafts because I didn't know what to let go of and what to keep. And the fact of the matter is I've now gone through that closet a second time and a third time, getting rid of stuff each time. And that's okay because that's my method. That's me learning how letting go initially wasn't enough to keep this space functioning correctly. So I had to let go of more. It's still not working. And so now it's time to go in and let go of more. Every time I go in there, it's pretty cool because I do have labels. I do have things that look pretty. And those are now the things that are functioning a little bit better than all of the other stuff. So it has been an evolution of figuring out how my damn craft closet is going to work for me. But that's what's really cool about organizing is that you watch the Home Edit or Marie Kondo, things like that. It does have that prettiness factor, but not the functionality that you get when you're working with someone who can help you really understand. I read the book Decluttering at the Speed of Life. One of the things she says in it is, okay, if you thought you had this, where would you first go to look for it? And I'm like, oh, it's so good. And I use it with every single one of my clients because if you're going to keep something, where's your brain going to go first? Because that's what we need to train your brain to do. We want to have spaces for things so that you're not constantly searching your house for things you thought you had and have gone missing.
Yes. When I was fairly young, my grandma told me a story about how her mom had finally caved. I come from a long line of women who quilt. So she told me that her mom, a million years ago, had finally caved and bought a really nice pair of sewing scissors. But she didn't want her kids cutting off tags or her husband using them for the chicken wire. So she hid them where she would know where they were, and they were gone. And she could not find them, turned the house upside down, looked high and low, could not find them. Finally, her husband was like, just buy another pair. So she did. And she was like, I'm going to hide these so that they don't cut tags off and cut the chicken wire with them. And she went to hide them and she found the other ones in exactly the spot that she went to hide them because she was thinking, where would I hide them rather than where would I find them?
Oh my
And
gosh.
that has been such a huge impact on me where now if I'm looking for something and I can't find it, I think to myself, if I had this in my hand, where would I put it away rather than where would I go to look for it? And if I'm trying to find a home for something that doesn't currently have one, I flip it around and ask myself, if I was going to look for this item to use it, where would I expect it to be? Because we think that those two places would be the same, and they are not.
That's profound. I never thought about that.
It's fascinating because it seems very logical that the place you would put it away and the place you would get it out should be the same place. But they aren't, because when we're looking at putting things away, we have a different set of criteria in mind. We're looking for where does it fit and where will it be convenient to store it. And when we're looking to go get it, we're thinking, okay, here's where I'm using it. So probably it's somewhere near where I'm planning to use it, and probably it's near other things that are similar use, and probably it's near maybe the last place that I had it, and it's a totally different set of criteria. So if you can use the second set for when you also put it away, it becomes so much easier to actually put things away.
I love that so much. It's so fascinating, these little tiny things that help us so much. I was working with a client this morning and we were talking about, I'm curious your thoughts on this because this is what I've been doing. I'm working with my clients on it in between sessions with me because oftentimes we work really good with our clients because we're there guiding them and helping them make the decisions that they can make on their stuff. But when I'm not there, I encourage them to work in 15-minute increments if they can. So instead of trying to tackle everything all at once, which is so fun when you're hyper focused and then you lose all of your excitement towards the project and maybe it never gets finished. Instead, you're actually creating a routine around tidying a space, especially when you have so much stuff. And I found that time boxing for me has been a game changer. It's been so incredibly helpful for me to say, okay, what can I do in 15 minutes? And then I'm not allowed to do anything else after that 15 minutes is up, unless it's 2 or 3 minutes just to like clean things up. What are your thoughts on that?
I have tried that method and I have found that for me, it's less effective because then I find myself not using that 10 or 15 minutes very effectively.
Mm.
I mean, partially we need to break it up into chunks. Our brains are not going to do the whole thing at a time. They're just not. And like you said, that's when you get everything out and you feel great and then you lose motivation and now you're sitting here in a pile of everything you own going, do we have carrot sticks? And then it just sits there. So what I have found that I have very recently started doing and have had a lot of personal success with it, and I've shared it with just a couple of clients so far, and they have had real success with it, is categorizing the stuff instead of the time. I just worked with one client who had a 2 foot tall paper stack of all of her business things, all of her life things, all of the mail. It was all in one stack. And she was like, I'm going to have to block off 4 hours out of my afternoon to deal with this. I just know it. There's so much stuff in here. And I was like, okay, instead of doing that, separate it into categories, come up with 3 to 5 categories, and then just deal with one. So if you're looking for client paperwork, if you pick up a financial statement, that's not client paperwork. We're not dealing with that right now. Just put it back where you got it. It doesn't matter. We're looking for client paperwork. So then when I found that with doing that, you don't have to pick up every single item and evaluate it because you're asking, does it fit the category or not? So you don't have to pick it up and ask yourself, what do I do with this? It goes in the place the client paperwork goes. So evaluating a pile of things that build up beside my microwave because it's right inside the back door. If all I'm looking for are the things that actually go to the garage, the pruners, the gloves, the various gardening tools, spare seeds still in the packet, whatever, I don't have to pick up every single thing and ask myself, okay, this seed packet, where does this need to go? This dirty dish, where does this need to go? Because all I'm doing are gathering up the things that go to the same place. And then I can finish with that category and then I'm done. And if I finish that category and have a bunch of energy left and I'm like, hey, I feel like I could start a second category. I feel great. Maybe I do that. If I don't, then it's fine. And the task that I set myself was that one category, and that task is finished. So I am now not leaving an unfinished task, which, you have the little red flag in your brain that holds on to your unfinished task. By dividing it into categories like that, I don't walk around with all those little flags about my unfinished tasks. And this has absolutely, just in the last few months, this has changed so much about the way that I'm doing things in my home.
I like that a lot because I've found that I thrive when I set boundaries on what I'm doing. So I love the time boxing, but I like that aspect because you're not time boxed in. It gives you the opportunity to finish your task, whatever it is, without rushing, and you can still check the box.
Yes.
I also do that, of course, when we're decluttering a space where we're taking everything out, we put things in categories so we can figure out where they all go. But I love that. And I never really thought about doing it that way.
Yeah. And the client that I shared it with, before she tried it, she was like, this seems really inefficient. It seems like it would be better to just go from the top of the stack to the bottom of the stack. And I talked to her a few days after, and she was like, this is miraculous. I got through the whole paper stack in half an hour, maybe, around doing things with my kids. And I did not have to block off time and send them to a babysitter or send them out with my husband. I just did it while they were still here. They were playing in the same room and it was not distracting. And I was able to get the whole thing done. And I have my kitchen counter back, and I haven't seen the kitchen counter in months.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, wow, so it's effective for more than just me, which is great.
Yeah.
Having put this together, I love what you said before about going through this closet repeatedly. And like we're sold this idea that organizing is a thing you do once, that it is possible to get organized. You cannot get organized. Organizing is a thing that you do. And my method, and it sounds like also yours, is not about being a one and done situation. It's about making the ongoing maintenance as easy on yourself as possible. Because if you have to keep doing it, why make it something that you hate or something that's hard when you could make it something that's intuitive and flows and feels natural and easy?
I love that. Because when I first got into organizing, I wanted to do it for myself. And then I really wanted to do it for others. as well. And I very truly thought it was a one and done type of thing. Even though I had been working on it myself for so many years, trying to figure out all of these methods, I still for sure, I thought there's got to be something I'm missing. But the truth is that if you want to be organized and ultimately have less, it is a lifestyle change. You envision what your life looks like living that way. And for me, oh my gosh, it's allowed me to let so much more in. Example, podcast, right? Also being a professional organizer, talking about how beneficial this is for our brain and so much more. So yes, it's not one and done. It can't be because there's always stuff coming into the house and there's always new things that we have to find spots for. And there's always things that in reality, we're just never going to use anymore. So where does that stuff go? Do you have kids?
I don't personally. I work with a lot of kids, so I'm I'm always thinking about how does this work with kids, even though I don't personally have kids, which is kind of a strange space to be in. One of my favorite things about organizing is organizing for kids and helping parents figure out how to get organized for their kids because kids love to be organized. They will organize things themselves if you let them, especially autistic children. I mean, categorizing things is like it's like play for autistics. And for me, when I was a kid, I would line up all of my toys and like sort them and categorize them. And that was playing. So when we give kids the space, they will do it. And the organizational systems we're taught rely on you have to force your kids into doing this thing that they don't want to do and they will resist with all their might. And when it makes sense to them, they really don't. They love it.
I love that you're saying that because I've been talking to people with kids and they're like, how do we do it? How do we help our kids figure that out? And my advice at this point, based on my own experience, is that you have to be the one to start. You've got to start with your own spaces first so that you can first demonstrate what that looks like. From there, I was taking a bath the other day and my girls came in and they were like, we are going to organize underneath the sinks. And I was like, well, they're already organized. And they're like, no, they're not. And I'm like, okay, well, then you have at it. But now that I've been talking to them more and they know what mommy does, we are working on implementing systems that work. And it's an evolving thing. One thing that I know a lot of parents can relate to is all of the artwork that comes home, all of the stuff. So instead of taking ownership of that and trying to figure out where all of it goes, I have been having my girls help me figure out what we keep and what we recycle. So we have a memory box where we keep things that we want to look back for memories. And it's a compartment and that's just where it goes. Then we have a drawer where artwork we might want to hang up on the wall goes. And then we have a spot where, we recycle all of the other paperwork. So I've been walking them through it. And my 4-year-old is very insistent on keeping everything. But I'm graceful with that because I'm just helping her understand the process. And it's okay that she doesn't want to let anything go right away. We're going to continue to talk about it and we're going to figure out how we can evolve together. I don't really know how her brain works yet, right? Like it's a process of, do you have ADHD? Are you autistic? Now I have to figure that out. And it's going to be different the way I parent one child versus the other, depending on that.
I completely agree. And especially with children with ADHD, they seem to fall into one of two categories, and adults are not different. I say children, adults are not different. I find that people either want everything to be put away so that they have clear surfaces so they don't have to look at clutter, or they need everything to be organized but visible, because if it's not visible, they forget that it exists.
Okay.
I personally am a everything needs to be visible ADHDer married to an everything needs to be put away ADHDer. So finding those systems that make us both happy. I mean, my mother stores her toaster in the cabinet. Boggles my brain. If I stored my toaster in my cabinet, I just now don't have a toaster. So finding those systems that work for everybody, but also a lot of the time when I was a kid, my room was constantly a mess because all of my storage that I had available to me was behind a closed door. And I didn't know how to articulate, if I put this in that drawer, I don't remember that it exists. So I don't. Which means there's no place to go with it but the top of the desk or the floor. And then my parents were always telling me, your room is a disaster. And I was like, yes, but I know where it all is.
Hmm.
because I need it to be out. So now, as an adult that I have control over my own space, I have a lot of open shelving. I have a lot of cube storage type situations where I can have things visible, but where they still look neat. When you don't
Yeah.
have the option for things to be visible but still look neat and you need them to be visible, your only option is to be messy. Especially working with kids and working with people who have kids, figuring out, like you're saying, how does their brain work? Because modeling that process and how it works for you might help them, but also modeling this is how you figure out where it should go and how it should be will be very different for different people depending on how their individual brain wants things to be.
So it's almost like you need to start at one point and again, let it evolve to what works for each individual child. And if they're sharing a room, in my case, they might work differently. And so maybe each of them has a space where they put away their individual items. Fascinating. I think working with kids is so much fun. My room was always messy as a kid. I don't know that I can fully assess if I needed everything out or put away because right now I love everything put away. I have a toaster in the cupboard and I know exactly where that toaster is, right? When we need it, it's out, but when it's gone, it's away. But I still know if we need to toast something, exactly where to go to get it. So that is totally me. My husband has ADHD as well. I'll have to ask him and see what he thinks about putting it away or having it out. I don't think I could assess him. I find working with kids so fascinating. And so, how was it like leaving elementary education and going into organization?
So, when you are organizing a classroom, you don't necessarily, you're not really able to give kids a lot of choice about how the room is organized because you have 25 of them and we can't make everybody happy. We have to come up with one system and teach everyone how to use it. But when you switch that to working with individual people in their home, you're not starting from that clean slate. When you walk into a classroom and you start to decorate your classroom, you're starting with a clean slate. You have a big open room. You get to decide, how do I want this place to function? When you go into a place that already has systems, I won't say functioning systems, but systems,
Hmm.
you don't have that clean slate to start with. The first thing you have to figure out is what are the systems you have now and why are they not working? Because systems that work great for some people will not work at all for other people. I absolutely love Marie Kondo. I think her stuff is brilliant. It would not work in my house. I cannot do it. Absolutely no, thank you. But I know other people that also have ADHD that thrive on the tidying up type systems, and that's great, but it's not for me. So trying to figure out what are the systems you have and where are they letting you down, which I think is also an important point of it. And like you have said, like it's not about you personally being a bad person. It's not about there being something wrong with you or you having failed in some way. It's that your systems that you have been taught to use have failed you. When we have this belief that they should be one and done, that when you find the right system, it's just perfect and you never have to do it again, then of course we keep looking for different systems. And of course, the systems that we find that are not built for our brain keep letting us down and we're not able to maintain them. And then when we can't maintain them, we think, well, I've failed at another one. And so by the time you start working with people, not only do they have their own systems of how things work in their home, they also have their own emotional stuff, their own emotional clutter from all of the beliefs that have been formed through this process of trying to figure out what to do, but also have been pushed on them by other people. I mean, how many of us, when we were little, heard the look who cleaned their room? That just makes you never want to do it ever again, where you're like, I'm going to go back in there and tear all this stuff back off the shelf and throw it back on the floor just because you said that. Like, it's not helpful. And we still carry all of those messages with us. And so, starting from what are you doing and why is it not working is a harder place to start, but also a more rewarding one than let's create a system from the ground up. Because you also don't really know when you're creating a system from the ground up, will it work? This is just a system I have and is an idea in my head. But once I bring it into a physical space, what happens? Because the way that people use a space dictates the way their organization will work.
I think what's also great about what you said too is it's not, I mean, we talked about this earlier, it's not one and done. And it's also, no matter what system is the perfect system for you, is not going to be perfect immediately if you're just starting. Because as humans, we're not good at things immediately. We have to continue to try and try and try to figure out if we're going to evolve and get better at this. And the more you know, the more you learn, the more you listen about organizing and figuring out what ideas work for you, the more you're going to figure out what systems will eventually make your life a little bit easier to live. And I think that's a common misconception as well is, well, I just need to do this. And if this doesn't work, well, then I failed. And just like we talk to ourselves, right? I think we can get on this track, this runaway train that takes us on this path of dooming ourselves and putting ourselves down based on, I don't know, how our brain is working. But the truth of the matter is that if we focused on everything that we are instead of everything that we're not, we could live in this world so much better, which is why I love having these conversations. Because can we be organized as neurodivergent people? 1,000,000%. We're sitting right here in front of you, showing you that, yeah, you can. And it's not freaking perfect. It's just not. Like my kids still make a mess, but I feel better about it because everything has a place. I know where it goes. And then I help them clean up. I show them what that looks like to clean up and where things go and how I actually do that with my kids. Like with the way that you are organizing the paperwork or helping that woman go through it is I help them understand, okay, don't look at this space as a huge space that you have to clean up. Let's just look for the dress up clothes. Put those away first. And then when we're done, okay, books. Let's look at books and let's put those away and working through it like that. So it's funny that you said that. I didn't even like put it together until now. That's exactly what I do with my girls. And that's really cool.
I love that method because it takes so much of the brain work out of it, because that's where we get stuck a lot of the time is the brain work of figuring out, I've picked up this item and now I have to figure out where is the holy grail spot to put this item that will fulfill all of my needs and expectations. And frankly, that's exhausting. So being able to say, oh, this is a book, it goes on the bookshelf. This is a book, it goes on the bookshelf. This is dress up clothes. I'm not looking for those right now. This is a book, it goes on the bookshelf. Takes so much of that brain work out of it. And then we get to use that brain power for things that we really care about and things that we want to do in our life outside of our home or inside of our home, but without focusing on the piles of stuff.
It reminded me of when I first got diagnosed, my doctor and I were talking about flitting around the house. I don't know if you've ever heard this term, but I'm sure you can relate, where you would start in the kitchen cleaning something, but then you'd have a rag and you'd walk into the laundry room and start a load of laundry because, well, I might as well because I have a rag. You go to get the laundry and you realize there's a basket that hasn't been folded yet. So you dump it out on. So, anyways, there's so many things that lead you down these different trails. And when you have rules in place and boundaries set for yourself, you can get so much more done. You get to check off that mental checklist you have in your head instead of 3 minutes, maybe an hour of flitting around the house like you've got nothing done because there's all of these tasks that haven't been completed yet.
Yeah,
Crazy.
you've touched 15 tasks and all of them are now half finished instead of
Oh,
having 3 that are fully finished, because on your way to the laundry room, you realized the dog had torn up another dog toy. So you've got to sweep that up. But then you're like, oh, I really should sweep off the front steps because the mailman is going to be coming and it's covered in leaves and that might be a hazard. So I should deal with that. And then you go outside and then you're like, wow, these windows are terrible. I am familiar with the experience, unfortunately.
there's ways around it. And I think that's what's
There
so
are.
cool about having the conversation is that we can relate to that. And now we have ways to not have to get to that point any longer.
Yes. And if your systems are built on the expectation that this is not something that happens to you, they are setting you up to fail. If you're setting up your systems with the expectation that this is a thing that you do, then you can set yourself those boundaries that you were talking about that keep you from doing that, where you can say, okay, we're not worried about that right now. I'm doing this and I'm going to finish this task before I move on. But you have to have those things built in. And so systems that build those in are always going to be more successful than systems that don't.
Like knowing who you are, know what you would do if you didn't have a system in place. And so how are you going to get in front of that and control what you do next? That was part 1 of 2. Part 2 will drop on Wednesday of this week. So that'll be the 27th of March. I am so excited to hear what you think about this episode. Just re-listening to it got me so excited about all of the support that's out there for people with ADHD, people with autism, people who have found that they have never been able to start or stay organized in their life. And I'm really excited for you to listen to part 2. In part 2, we jump off straight by me asking Alyssa what her superpower is and how she feels about that term being used in this world. If you guys want to hear more, I am going to be starting a Patreon link. I don't have it up and running yet, but I'll actually have some extra clips from myself and Alyssa that I'll include there. It helps support the podcast as I don't make any money making this podcast. I just really want to help people believe in themselves. And so any of your small support is super appreciated. What I'll also include in there is additional behind the scenes looks. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, please join me in my Facebook group where I also share a ton about what's going on with the podcast, different things I'm excited about. And I ask a lot of questions about what people are working on with organizing and what else you want to hear. If you need help with your ADHD organization or anything along those lines, please reach out to me. If you like what you heard, please share with others and leave a review. I would love to hear from you. My contact information is in the show notes below. Share your stories, share any feedback, share what you'd like to hear next. I am also a strong proponent of taking time off for yourself, and I've included a link to Remedy Bath Skincare below. This is owned and operated by one of my favorite people who has been in business for a couple years now, and I have been using her CBD bath bombs for years, and they're so incredible. I've never had a bath bomb that smells or works better than this, and CBD is just an extra pressure taker offer. If those are the words you want to use. Check it out below. I also included my link. It's Meg Bathco, and you can save 10% off of your order. Another way you can support the podcast is by using my link if you want to try out HelloFresh. It's an amazing way to automate your grocery shopping and try new foods. It takes so much of the thinking out of planning for the week. My ADHD brain has been so appreciative of HelloFresh. We've actually been using for I think all of 2024 now. We've tried so many new foods, some that we didn't like as much as we have liked, but so many amazing flavors. And I'm so thrilled to not have to think ahead to try to figure out what's for dinner, especially when my husband and I are managing jobs and then, of course, our kiddos at the same time. I want to reiterate, I am not a doctor, and most of the people I talk to are not doctors or medical professionals. What's really important here is that you shouldn't be using the show to diagnose. I wanted to make this show available to people who wanted to be able to relate to other people like them. I know I needed this tenfold when I first found out that I had ADHD, and I didn't know there were so many other people out there who had either gone through similar circumstances or were going through them at the same time as I was. So if this helps anyone feel like their brain works like other people's and we can relate to something, if you're trying to figure out if you have ADHD or not, please talk to your therapist or a medical professional so that you can truly understand what kind of options you have out there for support and, of course, for medicine. And then come here as you're along the ride for the journey and listen to people who are going through similar circumstances and understand that it's not a one-size-fits-all sort of diagnosis. There's so many options and opportunities out there for you.